Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. So first up, I need to bring you the shadow facts. I have a quick comment, annotation, clarification, correction, thing, to imitate Pippin. In episode 4, I was unclear about the names of the beacons that were being lit. The beacon that Pippin lights is the beacon of Minas Tirith. The guards shout that the beacon of Amandine has been lit when they see the next one being lit.
Right, that makes sense in the movie. So they see the next one and they're saying, oh, the next one's lit. There's a chain reaction. I get it.
Right. So it was just something about the names to clarify. Further, I mentioned that I would look into some of the lore surrounding Gondor and Rohan's mutual aid that they provide. Gondor came to Rohan's aid about 250 years before The Lord of the Rings. Rohan had come to Gondor's aid once about 100 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings. And there seemed to be some confusion about what we said in episode 4 that I also want to make it clear that Rohan is oath-bound to come to Gondor's aid, but Gondor is not oath-bound to come to Rohan's aid. I don't know if we made that entirely clear in episode 4, so I want to make sure that that's understood at this point.
Yeah, I did ask about that. I remember asking if it was mutually receptive, I think was the term. So it is not. Rohan is oath-bound to Gondor, and Gondor is just has an interest in aiding Rohan.
Yeah, more so.
Okay.
But Gondor did come to Rohan's aid at one point, though, and Rohan, who was oath-bound to come to Gondor's aid, did also come to Gondor's aid. So, today we're covering the new anime movie called The War of the Rohirrim.
This episode contains spoilers. Listening without viewing the movie called The War of the Rohirrim may result in confusion.
The War of the Rohirrim is now available for streaming. We recommend watching the movie before listening to our thoughts on it. JD, what were your initial impressions, your overall theater experience?
It was pretty odd to go and see a movie and not have anybody else except for the people in my group. It was definitely not an experience I'm used to. Which is sad because it happens all the time. I've heard of it happening with other animation movies, but just at least the part of the country I live, or in America generally, I hear animation movies for adults aren't too popular.
Yeah, the theaters were pretty empty when I was there too. There was like one, maybe two other groups of people at most. I saw the movie twice. Mm-hmm. First, I went just to enjoy it as a fan. And I went with my husband. We got popcorn and we enjoyed the experience just as a movie, and I had a wonderful time. If this experience was not what I was looking for in a Lord of the Rings film, then I don't know what I'd be looking for, because I had a wonderful time.
I think I was a bit too specific about the overall theater experience. The actual film was very a very good watch. We'll go into some more detail, but I did very much enjoy going and watching the movie. Animation is always that's what I was complaining about nobody going. Animation is so much better on the big screen than watching on your television set or on a monitor at home.
I never thought about that before. That's a fair point.
Yeah, I this may be tangential, but they do Studio Ghibli fests, and they play the films on TV, and Ponyo on TV wasn't ever that great or magical to me, but seeing it in a theater, the sweeping landscapes underwater were absolutely breathtaking. And similar stuff happened with this film, which we'll start covering now.
Well, the second time I saw it in the theater, I took notes to make the podcast, and I got to say that even then, the experience didn't disappoint. It was a good experience to be able to go to the theater and take notes on it as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wish I had taken more notes, but even with literally nobody being there, I felt weird having my phone out in the theater.
I had it under my coat hood.
I was like, this is just not right. I took like very minimal notes in the theater and expounded on them once I got home.
I just took notes the entire time. The theater didn't have that many people in it. I was sitting in the back.
Yeah, no, mine wouldn't have disturbed anybody because it was me and just the one other person I brought, my partner. So it would have literally bugged or disturbed the experience of nobody, but it was just like a social muscle memory. Like, just don't do it.
I'd be pretty against it under normal circumstances as well, but I made sure I wasn't disturbing anyone else. This is the experience I was paying for, was to be able to take notes on it.
Yeah.
It's hard to take notes on a piece of paper when it's that dark.
Right. We're going to, instead of covering the movie just like we have covered the other Lord of the Rings films beginning to end, we're going to just go over different aspects of the film that we saw and the characters and kind of break them apart, say what we liked and did not.
We actually have an entire section to talk about where the stuff we didn't like as much.
Oh, right. The first section that you have outlined here is the music, and I did not notice much about the soundtrack. I didn't have any points where it was offensive to me, though, but there was nothing that really stuck out either.
Inoffensive is always a great start.
Right.
For me, I noticed that the score instantly transported me to the original Lord of the Rings trilogy of movies with the first line of the theme music for The Ring.
And you might have more of like a trained response to that, having seen the films so many more times than I have.
And I've listened to the soundtrack a lot.
Yes, that too.
So I had a very trained response to that one line of music. It instantly transported me to the original trilogy. Honestly, I think that was what it was supposed to do, and that was what it did. It was very effective. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed the soundtrack the entire time through because I was able to notice all of the bits of the original score that was used.
They used motifs, from my understanding?
Yes, that's a good word for it.
The musical motifs are so great. If I knew Lord of the Rings well enough, I would have loved it too. I just, like I said, the soundtrack isn't as imprinted on me. But like using just like a bit of the soundtrack from the original work, but like just in your own original piece is a great way to do a reboot, adaptation, or a new piece of work in the same universe. So I get exactly what you're saying. I felt this way for plenty of fantasy in films. Like right offhand, always I could go to Star Wars and the Force theme, which is why that one I mentioned a few episodes ago is my favorite piece from that franchise. But yes, a motif kicking in really does help kind of get you right back there, because music is temporal and it affects like your sense of memory like that. So it's a good way to kind of shortcut the brain to going back.
I could even tell where the composer for this movie was inspired by Howard Shore, where he would make transitional music and things like that. It worked really well. I loved all of the music in the movie. I got to give this like 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. For me, again, like, and I gotta delve more into the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. So for me, it was 7 out of 10.
Let's keep track what we give things.
Okay. So I grade the music 7 out of 10 as a solid, 7.9 out of 10. It's a C+ and inoffensive, but, and this might be a very personal thing, but it didn't have the same reaction for me. And again, it's probably just because of my length of time being exposed to the motifs and other themes in the music.
That's entirely fair, though. So next up, I wanted to talk about the animation. JD, what did you think about the animation?
The beginning had some 3D rendering that I very much didn't like. For me, it was the very beginning. It had the eagles. It might have been more the camera, the quote-unquote camera, in the combination with the 3D animation, but it definitely, as I felt like physically ill, motion sickness. And then also the 3D animation kind of was like low poly. So the combination didn't leave me that great. Now, that's my only complaint, but it hits you really hard first thing. After that, though, it really grew on me. I liked the character design a lot, especially as the movie went on. There were some times where I was like, this is odd. Wolf's father had a lot of weird movements. Like, it looked pretty canned and reused or reversed. You know, when you take a video and then you like reverse it to, it looks uncanny. Some of his movements, but I feel like it. I don't know if it just started to be less important to me as I got immersed, or if the animation did just genuinely improve. But as the movie went on, I caught myself more and more just genuinely just enjoying what I'm looking at. A lot of there was some good scenes with this, like mostly after the last half of the movie. I think there was a lot more beauty and good looks in the animation. And always loved the character design for 80% of the characters. They did a good job with a lot of that. But it was mixed because of those other beginning issues I had with it.
The only scene I had a problem actually watching was when Hera was coming up to the lake in the marsh scene where she's trying to lead the Oliphant off, and she's scanning the pond.
Yeah.
And just the scanning over the marsh was very difficult for me to watch. It hurt my eyes. I had to close my eyes for it.
Oh, did it have like a sweeping motion to the camera? Right. Yeah, that one didn't get me physically, but it was a similar feeling to me at that beginning scene where they were flying.
The beginning scene didn't bother me at all.
Yeah. But like I said, I really like the art design. The 3D animation became more integrated, but there were just a few scenes where it popped out, like, and apparently different scenes for both of us. So I definitely can't give it like a great score, but it does, I think, on average, come to like about a 7 again, because there's some great and some awful.
The marsh scene was definitely difficult for me. I really liked the broad sweeping landscape shots that they had
in the beginning.
Yeah, the beginning, like I said, was fine. The other broad sweeping landscape shots, I really liked all of them. I'm no art critic when it comes to the quality of the animation, but what they depict with the animation included some pretty gnarly corpses.
Yeah, that was well drawn for sure.
I was really impressed at how horrific the animation made it feel.
Yeah, it was definitely like out of left field, because everything felt so fantastical, and then just such a like brutally realistic depiction of a dead person. And
the dead horse. The anime horses are so cute.
But
that horse corpse, that has stuck with me.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of I mean, it was supposed to make you feel that way, so that's a good mark, but it was very hard to watch. The horse with the bugs. Those bugs, too.
Yeah, pretty gnarly. So, overall grades, what would you give the animation?
I hate to give it the same, but I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 again. Just the parts that were good were good. There was some really nice stuff to look at, but the parts I didn't like just really held it back. I feel like they could have just cut like 2 or 3 scenes, though, and it would have jumped up to 10. It just had 2 or 3 really bad scenes that just way put me off or other people off.
I think I'm going to give the animation an 8 out of 10, mostly because for that one marsh scene, I figure I have to give it a higher grade than you do, because it's only one scene that bothers me. You have many scenes that bother you, so you should be giving it a lower grade than I am.
Right. The reason it's not even lower is it was a few short scenes, and they were in the beginning of the film. Like, it got better as things went on, which is usually in animation the opposite of what happens, too. Usually near the end, they start to run out of budget and things get funky looking.
That makes sense.
Which makes me wonder, this is pure speculation, I wonder if they somehow animated it backwards. They were running out of budget at the beginning.
I don't know.
I have no idea, but that's kind of what it felt like. If anybody watches a lot of anime, they'll know what I mean when a show's running out of budget for the season.
I basically didn't follow most of the news coming up to this movie because I knew I was going to see it regardless. And I wasn't interested in all the speculation, gossip, news reports, leaks.
Yeah, the 40-minute analysis of a 2-minute trailer.
It's not that I didn't indulge in any of it, but I was very limited in following this as it was happening. I mostly came into the movie knowing it was going to be a Lord of the Rings movie. I knew a few things, but not everything that there was out there. So I don't know how it was made or any of the information that could even already exist.
I did a little bit of research on some things afterwards, but just like clicking through Wikipedia and scanning the articles, and that was afterwards. Before I seen like one trailer on Adult Swim or something as I was watching TV. Nothing major at all, and it just showed a big battle scene. So all I knew is there was a big battle, and it was Lord of the Rings, and that's all I need. That is all I need, and I'm sold.
And you're on a podcast for it, so you had to go see it.
That's true. But even if I weren't on a podcast, it probably would have been sold too.
Good. So next up, let's talk about the writing.
Okay.
I found the writing to be great.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt that parts of this movie were very much in the style that Tolkien wrote in, especially Eowyn's narration. I felt what especially was quite in this style. Whenever Eowyn did her voiceover to narrate for the movie, which, I mean, to be fair, she doesn't actually identify herself as Eowyn. It's just Miranda Otto narrating the story.
Mm-hmm.
But all of her lines are so quotable. They're so beautifully written.
Maybe seamless is a better word than inoffensive. Like, I didn't even sit and think about like how much what you're saying is exactly correct. It felt like at least like you're saying with that intro dialogue scene, it felt like the intro to a Lord of the Rings movie.
Approximately zero of the dialogue in this entire movie is actually written by Tolkien.
Yeah, that was something that I wasn't really tossing around in my head too much. I do know that this was in the appendix, but other than that, and I'm sure we'll get more into that as we talk about it being an adaptation. I wasn't really considering how the writing would be versus the book, because I normally don't do that because I haven't read any of the books for the most part. So that is to say, like, it just felt exactly like the films to me, and the films I know quote a ton from the books.
And it's not that there aren't any lines that are written by Tolkien in the story. There are some,
oh,
but
really?
it's just that the vast majority of it isn't, because the source material is like actually 2 pages.
Yeah, I wonder what could have even been actually written by Tolkien. I'm curious.
Well, we will take a look at it when we get there. But it's a very short source material that they're working with. And I was just very impressed at the quality of what they were filling in the blanks with.
Right. And even not, like, judging the writing on its own accord, not as an adaptation or in universe, just as its own standalone piece. Like, it just didn't have any lines that felt out of place or bad. There was a lot of great dialogue the entire movie through. It was just really good, generally speaking, too. Not even as like a Lord of the Rings film. I felt like this would have just been great dialogue and writing, generally speaking.
It's not that there aren't even specific lines that I might take issue with, but just overall, the writing was very good.
I agree.
So, what grade are you giving the writing?
I think I have no complaints, and definitely I feel like it dragged the movie forward. Anytime somebody was talking, I was fully alert and wanted to see what they had to say next almost at any time. I would say it's a 10 out of 10.
I'll also give it a 10 out of 10. I really, really enjoyed it. So, as far as the quality of an adaptation,
I might not be able to grade this.
well, you can give me your takes on anime anyway.
Right. Yeah, I could do that.
One of the quotes I really liked from the movie was when the narrator says, "Do not look for tales of her in the old songs, there are none." It establishes the relationship that this story has with the source material. The source material that we have doesn't focus on Hera. She is mentioned in one line as the king's daughter.
Oh.
She's not even a named character in the source material.
Okay. That makes that line... I already liked that line because it was like, just, oh, really? Why is her name... But it's a reference to the actual works of Tolkien.
It is actually referencing Tolkien's works,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what this movie is. This movie is inspired by the 2 pages of text
Mm-hmm.
that there are in the appendix, which mostly talks about Helm Hammerhand, his fight with Freka, and then goes on to depict the legend of how he supposedly became a wraith and scared all the Dunlendings.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we're following Hera as the protagonist, the fact that she's named Hera, is what this line is referencing, that none of that is in the original work.
Yeah, so Hera wasn't even a name listed in the appendices.
Her name does not exist.
All right. It was just Helm's daughter?
In one sentence, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do not look for tales of her in the old songs. There are none.
But she was technically mentioned by Tolkien. Just
her existence is mentioned by him.
Yeah, okay.
But what her name was and what she did is not commented upon.
Yeah.
Tolkien didn't say her name wasn't Hera.
Right. That's really interesting how much they could do just off of one sentence of a character in an appendix and make this a great film. That's really impressive.
Everything Hera is something the movie made her.
Okay, yeah, because she didn't exist at all, except everything Hera is that the film made her, except being Helm's daughter, as you said.
Yeah. One of the things that this movie does, we mentioned this earlier, is that the movie brings The Lord of the Rings to the style that is anime. Mm-hmm. Anime is a style, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it definitely is. There's some gray areas too, but there's definitely, and it's one of those words that I feel like people have different definitions when they're using, but there is definitely a common use of anime, just talking about the style that is common.
And there's certain tropes in anime, certain boxes you have to check, or you're going to be less anime.
Yeah, it's almost like a genre.
Exactly. So I laughed so hard when Hera pulled out that giant turkey leg. From the moment she pulled it out until the title screen, I was laughing so hard.
Oh my god, that's like what, at least like a couple of minutes, right?
Yes. Jeez. It was so funny to me. I thought this was awesome because it's such a great way to make Lord of the Rings into the style that is anime. It compromises nothing about the values of the story and just comments upon the trope in anime of making things ridiculously big.
Yeah. It does like you said. It doesn't lessen anything, and it just was absurdly hilarious. I'm so immersed in anime that sometimes the tropes don't even like hit me. But I didn't, like I said, this movie going in, I just was mostly trying to enjoy it as like I knew about Lord of the Rings, but I was trying to enjoy it like as an anime on its own, like not even considering it a part of Lord of the Rings. And so for me, that scene hardly even clocked or phased me. I was just like, yeah, the giant chicken leg that she has, the giant turkey leg, of course.
But that's what I'm saying. You know about the giant turkey leg from anime.
There it is.
Something like this would be really hard for Tolkien fans who don't understand anime to understand.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I understand a lot more about the genre that this movie is depicting than the source material. If it was the other way around, I could see that just throwing you for a complete loop.
I haven't really watched or listened to many reactions about War of the Rohirrim at this point. Mm-hmm. But I can imagine that the giant turkey leg is going to be something of a meme among the non-anime Tolkien fans.
Yeah.
So another thing that's common in anime is fantastic battle sequences. Mm-hmm. Awesome moves, things that don't follow physics. You just got to roll with it because it's cool. Mm-hmm. And this movie does lean into those type of tropes. Again, I thought this was an awesome choice because purist Tolkien fans don't like the battle sequences in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. You got Legolas. Really? You got Legolas skating down a stairway with a shield. I think it's cool. Oh, but that gets a lot of hate.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like the over the top scenes where the characters do individual moves that are. I thought you meant like they just generally didn't like the large battle sequences that are in the books. It's like, well, really? But no, you're specifically saying like there's some over the top things that specific characters do, like you said, the shield ride by Legolas. Yeah, no, I don't get the hate. Why anyone would hate something like that. I mean, unless they really feel like it's a waste of time.
I think there's some objection to the existence of large battle scenes, but I was specifically focusing in on the feats of physical heroism and stuff like that that characters pull off, because anime is really good at doing things anime is really good at doing things that are physically impossible.
Is this in regards to any specific battles or sequences or characters? Because I'm trying to think, and there was a few times I'm thinking specifically when Hera and Wolf were dueling, multiple times throughout the movie too. The first time and the latter time, both. I see what you're talking about there. Is there any other times that you're referencing?
I wrote this note during the battle with the Oliphant, the first one in the plains, before Hera draws him off.
Yeah, no, okay, I totally see what you mean with that specific scene feeling like straight from a shonen or something.
Exactly.
Anime, yeah.
I was really glad that Haleth did not do the Naruto run. Like, that was when I was writing this note, was like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that Haleth is not running like Naruto, because that would just look ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So another check mark for anime is you got to have a monster fight scene.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you have to contrive your Oliphant and your Watcher in the water out of nowhere ever in the lore. You got to have a monster fight scene or it's not an anime movie. And
yes,
given the fact that you need a monster fight scene, I thought this was very thought-provoking. I don't know that I don't like it, but I don't know that I like it. I think I need to see how this scene ages with me.
For me, I thought that it was a pretty good piece of action to keep things moving.
From a lore perspective, I'd never thought of the similarities and differences between the Watcher and an Oliphant. They occur in such different parts of the book that I never really put them in the same thought.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean the movies too, I feel like I almost like the Watcher in the Water is like somewhere in early Fellowship, isn't it?
Second half of the Fellowship.
Second half of the Fellowship, yeah. I don't know. For me, it definitely, I almost forgot what it was. Like, you just see the tentacles in the film, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you get one shot of the mouth or something.
Oh, okay. I know we just finished them, but I got to rewatch Lord of the Rings.
I recommend them. They're good movies. But once the movie put me in thought of the Watcher and the Oliphant in the same thought, I started trying to think about the differences between them. And the first thing that occurred to me was that the Watcher was a unique entity. There is one Watcher in the water, whereas an Oliphant is a member of a species.
Yeah.
And then as I was watching the movie, there was a moment in the dialogue where the Watcher is referred to as a Watcher in the water, which casts the Watcher also as a member of a species in this interpretation. This made me realize that I don't think there's anything actually definitive in the Legendarium to say that the Watcher must be a unique entity. I think that's the common understanding of it, and probably the one with stronger textual evidence for it. But I don't think there's anything definitive to say it must be that way.
Yeah, it definitely is something like in such a magical world, you when you come across something like, I don't know, the Watcher in the Water, where it's a very odd and something you only come across once, it is. I feel like if you were living in there, you'd be kind of like, is there more things like that out there? Is this a thing that I have to know about and deal with everywhere, or is that just over there? You know, it kind of does, having them talk about it being a Watcher in the water in this film, but you're not sure if it's multiple. It also kind of makes it feel like it's like a legend or an old wives' tale, like telling like kids to watch out because those are out there, when it might just be the one, because it might just have been like a magical freak accident that happened to something else.
Hera even has a rhyme about the Watcher in the water.
Yeah, it's the world building is just so. I feel like Tolkien didn't live when the rules existed, so he just does whatever he wants, and it's so rich because of that, though.
Tolkien made the rules for world building.
He made the rules for world building, yes. So, you know, he doesn't have to worry about if it's a species or a standalone creature. It's just that's the Watcher in the Water that they encountered. It doesn't much matter if there's a bunch out there or not, really.
I just thought it was really an interesting bunny trail that the movie sent me on something that I never would have thought of before without the presence of this movie, and I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. What I think the biggest thing I wanted to hammer on is if there could just be one, and they just the characters in the movie, the society just extrapolated that there were multiple. Like they just assumed that.
Yeah.
After seeing one, or there could be multiple, or no, but it is something interesting to think about that I wouldn't have thought to wonder about after seeing it. It's like there's a bunch of like weird fantasy creatures in a bunch of other movies like that are you don't really think like, where did that come from? Is there more? You're just like, good thing they got away. That's the role of them, and it's nice that this movie kind of changed that a bit for this specific yucky monster.
My last point about the animation was that I thought that Helm's One Punch Man imitation against the orcs was really funny, where he goes, when he punches the orc and then punches the next orc and then punches the snow troll or whatever.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of One Punch Man, and I thought that was just absolutely hilarious how he was one punching all these guys.
Yeah.
And I thought this was another good choice on the part of the creators to make this anime without, once again, compromising values or anything like that.
So you've mentioned that terminology twice. How would an animation style or choice have actually compromised the values? Or are you just saying like it's something other people worried about? Is there a way that they could have messed this up so bad that just but in the art itself ruined the whole thing?
So I realize this is going to be specific to a certain subgenre of anime, but we mentioned shonens earlier.
Yeah.
Shonens are very obsessed with power levels.
Yeah. Okay.
And gaining power and fight scenes and things like that. And this is absolutely contrary to the values of Tolkien to seek out power, to beat your enemies into submission, and measuring your power levels against each other would make absolutely no sense and be a terrible choice to try to depict a story in Middle-earth.
Yeah, that's a actually great example. I'm surprised you just came up with that on the fly, because I could see them thinking, oh, how do we make an anime? We'll just throw that in there, and it's just completely going against what the entire point of the entire work feels like. You know, those who seek power and want to get stronger aren't the heroes in Lord of the Rings.
I come up with it on the fly because I'm exposed to many shonen animes, and I view them through the lens of Tolkien's values, and this is what bugs me about them every time now. Yeah,
that's a interesting point.
We need to talk about our final grades.
The adaptation quality final grade. I said 8.5. It was a solid. There was no real complaints on me. The only reason I wouldn't grade it a bit higher is it's just some of the tropes you mentioned do feel a little bit tired, but it's kind of campy. You know, I don't hate it, but I don't love it.
And I gave the adaptation quality a 9 out of 10 because I think the ways they chose to make this anime were very inoffensive, and I think that was a great way to go about adapting this. I really like the animation format for Middle-earth, so I'm already given to liking it, and my familiarity with anime overall gives me a better chance at liking this format than perhaps some others.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really into anime, but like I said, I was almost grading this just as an anime film, and there were some times where it felt like, even though I know the actual animator is Japanese, or there were times where it just didn't feel exactly like a traditional anime made in Japan. Which it wasn't, but just talking about it as an adaptation, there were some, and I don't have a very good specific example, but I just would have given it a higher score. Just some of it felt like it was a little shoehorned in, making it into an quote unquote anime adaptation versus just a good animation film.
Yeah, there were definitely moments of that. So we gave very similar scores. You gave 8.5, I gave 9.
Yeah, that 0.5 though.
So next I have a bunch of character analysis. Here is the first one I have up here.
probably the most important one we're going to do. She's the main character.
She is the one through whom we view the story.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the main character in this adaptation, I'll even say. But it sounds like she is definitely not in the source material, if there is a main character.
Yeah, like I said, the source material is basically the story of Helm. I would say Helm is the protagonist of the 2-page book version.
Yeah, the 2 pages, like you said, yeah.
Hera gets mentioned in one sentence, but not by name.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything about Hera, except the fact that she is Helm's daughter, is a story that the movie is creating. That said, let's take a look at her character and see what we like and what we don't like about her character.
I don't have much complaints at all. I feel like she was well-rounded. One of the scenes, this is in the later half of the movie, but eventually Wolf executes both of her brothers, and one of them right in front of her and her father. Wolf's the antagonist of this movie. She is raring and wanting to fight him, and ready to go, and she's held back by some of her retainers and other allies, and her dad crumbles in despair at the same time, which the traditional roles would be reversed. You would expect, the big, and just from how they look, the big strong king would be like having to be held back, and the small dainty princess would be crumbling in despair. So she's not the type to do that, though. She's the type to go and take action.
And yet if her father had charged forward, I think she would not have.
Oh, you think maybe that was that scene, she would have known better if she'd seen him doing it?
She steps forward when she has to. She's proactive, but she's also not seeking glory for herself at the expense of others. Yeah,
that's true. I also just Helm was also shot up with arrows too, so it may have been a physical component to his crumbling. It may have not been pure despair, but also agony and pain from a hard fought battle. But all of it together, yeah. And I see what you mean by Hera wouldn't have gone forward if her father was already doing that, because it wouldn't have been necessary, and she probably would have cautioned him to be careful, because she's also very selfless.
Yes.
And a lot of selfless characters will be maybe like more willing to do an impulsive, risky thing if it's just their neck on the line, which Hera definitely fits, versus somebody else's. They're not going to be risky with somebody else's safety.
Definitely. I liked that Hera sent Olwen to go search all the rooms and take stock of everything. There was that one scene when they got to what would later be known as Helm's Deep. What I will call Helm's Deep, even though it's not Helm's Deep yet. But
what did they call it? I forget. Do you remember?
I don't remember offhand.
It'll come to me. I know it will.
The Hornburg, maybe they referred to?
Yeah, it was something with a horn. I remember that.
Okay, then it would be the Hornburg. But it's a fortress. And if I refer to it as Helm's Deep, forgive me. When Hera gets to Helm's Deep with the people from Edoras, she sends Olwen to go search all the rooms to take stock of everything. And I really like this. I know it's a small thing, but that's why I like it, because she's not going to be defeated by overlooking the small stores of firewood that can be found throughout the fortress. Evil overlooks contributions of the small. Hera is looking to keep everyone warm, even if it's just one extra fire from a couple logs she found in the corner.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good, like, note to make of her character, and that bypassed me, but it is illustrative of like how she's not only caring, she's very smart and interested in making sure she doesn't trip herself or her own side up. She's like, I guess proactive was the word we used earlier. She plans ahead, she's strategic, and then she isn't to the point where sometimes when you describe a character as strategic or cunning, they seem like they value that the most, but it's her intelligence isn't an end, it's a means to be kind.
Yes, very much. Hera also plays a role of encouraging hope and community at the war meeting. I really liked that role for her as well.
Mm-hmm.
She's told pretty words will not save us, but she's going to be the one who ends up saving them.
Mm-hmm.
So her pretty words will save their spirits, and
Mm-hmm.
she's going to save their physical safety.
Did she say pretty words will not save us?
No, that was what one of the other generals, advisors, people, because she came in with her speech about hope and community, and it was a good speech, but I was in the theater and I didn't get to write it down.
Right. I remember the scene too, but not the specific dialogue. I remember it was definitely, that's why I was confused. Pretty words will not save us I thought that was a quote from her.
No, that was the quote to her.
From the advisor, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's saying the despair that Wolf brings is his greatest weapon. You need to keep up hope and support each other during times like sieges and stuff.
Right. Oh, this is once they're in the helm.
Yes.
Hornburg.
They're already in Helm's Deep.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was thinking of another scene where somebody disparaged something she said before Wolf had even attacked the city. Something similar happened, but I do remember now. Once they were under siege at what will be Helm's Deep, we'll like you said, we'll just call it Helm's Deep.
Let's call it Helm's Deep.
So when they're under siege at Helm's Deep, this is where the scene happened. And Hera at that point, I feel like had a lot more sway and say in things to go, how things were going. You know, she was kind of a minority voice before then.
She's the only child of Helm at that point.
That's true. Yeah, and Helm's I think unconscious at this point. When this is happening, he's either unconscious or not around for the other reason.
So she's put forward. You know, she comes into a war meeting and gives a speech, not because she's looking to change things, not because she's looking to be powerful or anything, but she is legitimately the next one in line for the throne.
Yeah, she's the only royal blood left, able to make decisions.
Another thing I noticed was that it's Hera's physical strength that makes the difference when they're opening the gate to Helm's Deep.
Right, yeah. I didn't actually clock that, but you're right.
When she's out in the ice and she and the not Wraith form of her father are rushing back to Helm's Deep, they're struggling to open the gate. She adds her strength to the pile, and that's the little difference that makes the door open. Mm-hmm. It's that small store of firewood that she found. It's that little hobbity addition to the story that changes the direction of things.
Right. Yeah, I think I get at the overall theme that you're saying here.
Yeah. It's the little things. And it's a pretty big theme in Hera's character that she's all about choice and free will. There's several conversations she has, very pointed conversations about, what do I have? I have a choice. Things like that. She has even radical acknowledgement of free will.
Well, the entire conflict started because her free will was trying to be transgressed by her father and then also one of his men. It was a betrothment scandal or issue that broke out into this war. And that's like the ultimate subversion of free will, is having your father pick who you're going to spend the rest of your life with.
We don't necessarily know what kind of conversations they had about the Gondorian princeling off screen, because that had kind of already happened before the movie started. It is true that Helm did not consult with her. I have some notes about this coming up under Helm's character. I
feel like it was mentioned that Hera didn't. I forget if she either didn't know or didn't agree with the Gondorian prince either. Very shortly after it's revealed, and Wolf's trying to actually personally propose to her instead of having his father propose to her father.
She does say that she doesn't want to marry any man, but I didn't hear that she was refusing the marriage in that.
Yeah.
She can not want to marry any man and also still have agreed to the Gondorian princeling marriage for other reasons. She doesn't say that she hasn't agreed to it or that she's going to fight it or anything like that.
Right.
She just says she doesn't want to marry any man.
And this kind of culminates in somewhere in Helm's Deep. They find an old wedding dress, and that's what she chooses to fight in for the final conflict. I Kind of wish she had actual armor on. That would have been nice.
Her dress was less revealing than a lot of anime armor.
That's true, but it still wouldn't stop a sword. I mean, if it's a one-on-one fight, maybe armor is slightly less important.
Armor is also a hindrance.
It's true it can be if you're a duelist, and again, on a one-on-one fight, it might be less effective in hinder things. That's possible.
I really don't know. But to kind of bring up your next point, even in this one, you note that you don't think that Hera's had any real combat experience outside of training. You might need some extra experience in armor or something like that to make it really effective.
That's true. Or even she hasn't been trained in it. Her training style might have been like more, I know, like say for example fencing, where it's a sport or an art and they don't use armor, and it's applicable if you hold a real sword and stab somebody with it, but if you know your moves you learned weren't in armor, then it really much could be a hindrance.
Armor is also really heavy.
Yeah, there's different versions, and also, I mean, if the dress, it doesn't really say what it's made of. The wedding dress is made of silk. That's technically armor anyway, against arrows, which again, in this movie, arrows play a major role. Love me arrows, my favorite character.
I also have a note about that.
Yeah. My next note, where I say she doesn't have a combat experience. I meant battlefield experience. She had a chance to take Wolf out after the duel's over. Instead, she asked him to call everything off and expects him to be honorable. I feel like it was super obvious that purely logically that she should have, right? Because he's such a bad, irredeemable person. That if this were a real world conflict, of course, the only thing he was going to do was inform his army and lead them to charge. And so her staying her hand, I think, was an interesting choice by the writers. That was my first impression. But honestly, I think then I considered the fact that he just had killed her brothers, and I think it really was showing more strength of character and showing restraint and giving him mercy. And it wasn't really hesitation, but an active choice.
I thought that killing Wolf with the shield was brutal, but it was a creative way to kill him. It wasn't just stabbed through the gut again or something like that. It seemed a very realistic way to kill someone, not bloody.
Right. I wonder if, now that I'm thinking, if not, she had to do that, and I wonder if it was harder for her to kill him with a shield than it would have been to like take him down like cleanly, so to speak, with a sword while he was already defeated. Such a brutal way to execute somebody or defeat somebody. That it was creative, but it was ugh.
It's just not what I expected to see. No,
yeah, it definitely there was I don't know, this movie portrays death in a pretty cool way, and it happens with other characters too. It's very like sudden and scary and startling when it happens. And I feel like every death that happens in this movie, and there's a few, it's very shocking, which is good. I like that a lot. I personally, and I know that there's historical reasons that this may have been, but it didn't seem like that's what the movie was going for. I think Hera should have not wanted to take the throne, but been forced to by duty or been bound to, or the kingdom would have been in disarray. They kind of had her cousin take it instead, but like in the real world, sometimes the choice isn't that simple, and you don't want to take the throne, but you're supposed to, and the reluctant leader is always the best one. That's a theme in Lord of the Rings, and also a lot of people say in real life. Like, I would have loved Hera to be a reluctant leader on the throne, but instead she gets the option, thankfully for her in character, I should say. But I think it would be a more satisfying story if she did end up on the throne against her will, so to speak, or compelled to be on the throne.
And I think that would make a good story. It is one of the things in the original text that Freyalaf gets the throne. Why isn't really specified, because she's got that one-off line and is never mentioned again. So the reasons behind it are definitely unique to the movie, but the fact that Freyalaf gets the throne was something that was specified in the original material.
I think it's a lot more interesting than like middle-aged chauvinism that she didn't get the throne, though. It's that she was just not interested in it, and there was a good alternative. So it is better. Like they were working with, she already didn't get the throne, and they came up, I think, with the best possible answer to fill in that blank.
And that's, I think, the best thing that the movie could try for.
Yeah, and I imagine if they just completely changed it and said, okay, Freyolaf doesn't get the throne, Hera does, that would have thrown off the canon, made this completely not canon, and probably angered quite a few people.
Yeah, I mean, it's already not canon because it's a story not written by Tolkien.
Yeah.
But you're right, it would have changed the universe that it's in.
This is cool because it fits within the actual written appendix universe. Like all of this is like between the lines, I guess, from what I'm understanding with your description. It's not said at all, but it's not said. Where if they change something like that, that would be just completely changing everything.
I mean, there are some liberties taken, of course. Mm-hmm. There's no Oliphants or Watchers in the Water or things like that. The climax goes down slightly differently. Adaptation changes are made, but Freyolaf getting the throne was not one of them.
Yeah, and that would have been, I feel like, more major than any of those other choices personally, when describing the differences. There was something on this, but I forgot to put a note on it. I did a little bit of research, but I didn't write it down. The director wanted to base Hera, he told the writers, off a Anglo-Saxon queen who actually did ascend to the throne. I wish I wrote down which one it was, but it was a pre-Norman queen, the only one, and she was the Queen of Mercia. She was out of place, and it's very interesting to modern historians in a non-negative light. So that was one thing I thought was interesting. She, when Wolf told everyone to charge, Hera did have a near-death experience. I think, and then her and maybe one of her retainers and then her cousins survive, and everybody else in this movie like gets it at one point. They die, And I liked. I always end up going back to Star Wars, which I'm not the biggest fan of compared to other fans, but it is one of my favorite franchises. But Rogue One was a great little in between the actual trilogies movie that they had to kill off every character because they didn't know where to put them after, and this would have been an interesting way to handle it. I felt, and when I was watching that scene with Hera and Olwen fighting on the siege bridge, I thought they were going to die and everybody was going to lose. But the story will continue on, and that's why it was called Helm's Deep, and that's what they were going to do to wrap up this show. Which honestly, killing Hera might have been a good way to prevent her from going on the throne, in keeping with the actual written canon too. Now that I know more,
I mean, they could have chosen to do that for sure.
It would have been an interesting choice. I don't think I would have liked it better though, but it would have been just as good, I'd say.
I think I would have liked it less.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really like Hera.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hera is a perfect Tolkien heroine to me.
Mm-hmm.
She's noble, honorable, strong, nurturing, protective, smart, wise, plucky. She values choice and community. She's loyal. She's loving. She's a good leader. And I like that she turns down the throne when there's another worthy of it.
I mean, I do think that's the right choice. I just think the writing of Freyolaf as being so worthy of it kind of felt like a cop-out. But it was the right thing for Hera to do, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, Freyolaf is a truly honorable guy. Everything in this movie. Actually, Freyolaf is perfect.
I might have to look up the actual words, but there it is. All right. So continue with your analysis of Hera.
So I really like that she turns down the throne when there's another worthy of it. The when there's another worthy of it is the key here. Notice what I've been building up about she steps forward when no one else will. She steps forward against Wolf when her father doesn't step forward. She goes into the battle room when no one else is there to go. She leads the people to Helm's Deep when no one else can lead them. There is another worthy of the throne, and she does not step forward to take it.
Interesting. I did not make that connection when you were asking me earlier about my first point about Hera. I didn't. Yeah, but that is a good point, and it is good. It is a good. She's reserved when she needs to be and active when she needs to be. It's very the word I'm thinking of is like temperance. She has very good balance of both, and in having both qualities, it's forged into having like a completely new thing.
I'm reminded.
Not temperance in the 19th century sense, but like the 15th century sense.
Definitely. I'm reminded of the conversation in the books where Aragorn and Éowyn are talking about Éowyn wanting to go fight, and Aragorn tells Éowyn that not many people can live the lives that they want to live and still be honorable.
Right.
Because Éowyn wants to go fight, and he says, but you have a duty to your people. You have to be ruling here instead. And she says, but I want to go fight. And he says, you need to maintain your honor and stay here and rule your people. You don't get to do what you want to do. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this as one of the rare opportunities that Hera has the ability to live the life she wants to live and still maintain her honor because there is someone else there to rule. Freyalaf is a worthy ruler.
Yes.
Now, I already had this comment before I ran into comments about Hera, that I already foresaw that some people might call her a Mary Sue.
Mm-hmm.
But I do not think that this is true. She's close enough that I could see how people could misconstrue that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she does have absolutely limitations and can be overpowered.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she's almost taken out in the barn. I want to talk about the barn scene later on. But that's an example that springs to mind of, short of chance helping her out,
Yeah.
she would have been overpowered.
I mean, also another scene where she was pretty much completely defeated was when she was captured and had to be saved by her allies when Wolf had her and was explaining his evil plan. Yeah,
she's captured, and she's almost captured a couple times. Mm-hmm. She definitely has limitations and stuff like that. She is not a perfect, all able person.
Right.
Her good qualities are hers by choice, not by fate.
I think the whole complaining about Mary Sue phenomenon is so overdone because, very few characters in general are written that way, and I feel like people only bring it up when it's like a female lead that the main character is strong.
Do you know why it's called Mary Sue?
I do know that there was a term Gary Stew, right?
That's derivative of Mary Sue.
That is derivative of Mary Sue. Okay, I thought so, but somebody told me otherwise. Somebody who I thought was wrong, but didn't have time to look into it. So no, where's the term Mary Sue from?
Star Trek fan fiction.
Oh, really?
It was a classic Star Trek fan fiction that wrote in a female character named Mary Sue.
In Star Trek?
In Star Trek fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And this character was perfect in every way. Fan fiction is often comically terrible writing. Yeah. This character, who happened to be named Mary Sue, was the absolute definition of the perfect, untouchable, overpowered female character who can do anything she wants in the universe. Mm-hmm. And from this fan fiction came the concept of that character, which is called Mary Sue, in homage of that particular fan fiction.
Right. Right. And I see all sorts of characters called Mary Sues that I don't see them being a badly written fan fiction representation in the media, especially not Hera. A lot of in the last decade, female protagonists have taken off, become a lot more popular. They're not always done perfect A1, but they're more often than not really good. I usually enjoy a female protagonist more than a male protagonist. And I don't think it's just like a fresh change of pace from like decades or centuries of it being the other way around. And there's still typically, I'd say, more male protagonists in movies anyway. But I feel like people just use the term Mary Sue to complain about a female protagonist. That's the main character, like the main protagonist,
I think there's definitely some of that among some people.
And like Hera doesn't strike me just as like completely overpowering or anything like that, like we were mentioning earlier. She seems like has to be very careful to not be overpowered, and she needs help and gets defeated a few times and is in peril quite a bit. In peril more than like a typical male character would. Like I think just off the top of my head, without counting, Hera is in peril more than, like, say, Aragorn is ever in the Lord of the Rings. In this one movie, if you like average it out, Aragorn doesn't really ever come that close to dying, but he's not called a bland protagonist by any means.
Falls off a cliff, is thought to be dead.
Okay, that was one time in 3 movies. I guess also the suicide charge at Mordor could count too.
And every time he's in a battle, you might get stabbed.
Yeah.
Or an arrow.
That's not the same though.
Or 3 arrows.
Narratively. I don't know. I'm not saying Aragorn's a poorly written character either.
No, I'm not either. Yeah.
I'm saying that he's a great, fine written protagonist, and so is Hera.
I think maybe what you're trying to say is that Hera's story arc is that of a woman. It's not that of a woman put in a man's story.
Right. Yeah, that's true too. I see the connection for sure.
Like,
do you want to expound though?
Well, comparing to Aragorn is a hero's journey type character. We pick up in the books. We pick up with him at the end of it, but he's had 80 years of story arc before we pick up with him. In the movies, they're cramming all of that into his character arc, and so we're seeing the reluctant king in the movies. And Hera, on the other hand, is concerned with betrothals.
Yeah.
That's the main mechanism of motion in her life when we meet her.
Right. So, okay, I see
not trying to claim a kingship. Laying claim to a kingship and a hero's journey is a stereotypically male story arc.
I get it. And yeah, there's not very many, or if you're making a female character, it wouldn't make sense for her to have that same motivation.
She has female motivations with female story arcs going on, with concerns that would make sense for her station and role in life.
Yeah, almost like the impetus of her actions in society versus Aragorn and society's expectations on him are just completely different. Like, it acknowledges, and I was confused when I first read your note what exactly you meant, but it acknowledges the difference that, like, not just like Lord of the Rings society, but specifically Lord of the Rings society, this one puts on, like, expectations for women, and versus men, like, especially like nobility, but also like the internal motivations.
Yeah.
The external, the betrothal versus the misclaim, though, that's the easiest for me to see what you're illustrating, for sure. And that's definitely like a societal wide thing. Like, you'd never hear a story about a prince who was betrothed. It didn't really happen to them in that way.
Princes were betrothed, but I feel like it didn't impact the course of their lives in the stories the same way it does for a woman in the stories.
Too, it didn't often impact their lives the same way it did. If we're talking about Europe, it was like a patriarchal family line, not a matrilineal. So they didn't have to move to another country or anything like that.
Yeah.
But
Helm mentions that as well. He says that Hera will move away, she'll raise children not of his household, and she'll be safe and happy, and he will have succeeded in protecting her.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really cool take on that patriarchal system.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying patriarchal is in a judgment, just like talking about the family style from a sociological standpoint. Like, they take the father's last name, and the woman goes to live with the father, and that's kind of similar to what things go now, but now it's a bit more even. Like, it's not like but back then it was definitely like the woman became a part of the father's family, very much so.
The man's family, yeah.
Yeah, the man's family, right. And now it's not quite like that. It's like more like you're transmuting, creating something new, typically in an American household. Although, I mean, there's a lot of asterisks and stars and dashes, yada yada. But
a lot of things happen in America.
Yeah, exactly. But if we're talking about the time period, this was Anglo-Saxon England, or any medieval Europe generally, that's the reality that reflected into this fantasy work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, that was a good point, and then it does bleed more into her character. Speaking of her betrothal,
moving on to Wolf.
I think this Wolf is the antagonist. I think it was interesting before the call to action that caused him to go from an opposing party to like an antagonist trying to kill people. He did seem really intent on marrying her for personal, not political reasons in the scene where their fathers are out getting ready to duel over this betrothal.
Yeah, he seemed to genuinely care about her.
Yeah, and that really added a depth of interesting dimension to his character to me. Made him a very interesting... I thought he was a great, interesting antagonist. His voice actor did a great job at depicting his anger and scorn. I liked him. He's an interesting character. This wasn't a completely original thought, but he was a very human evil versus like the Lord of the Rings having such like high and mighty evils.
That's true.
He's very like in the like, you know, like Sauron and Saruman are nothing like Wolf at all.
That's true. Wolf is very personal about his evil in a way that Sauron and Saruman are not. Wolf isn't here to dominate the world. He's here to get his revenge. Right.
He's just doing whatever like he thinks will make him feel better in the moment to moment. He's impulsive. He's hot-headed. But he's also in charge of a bunch of people. So like what happens when that happens is usually pretty messy.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like about Wolf in the beginning is that he addresses Hera directly when they're first making the proposal.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't talk to Helm or anything like that. Wolf proposes to Hera directly.
Yeah.
Helm doesn't consult Hera before he insults Freka, though, Wolf's dad. And one of the things this made me think of was that in the Norse myths and the sagas, it generally doesn't go well if the father makes marriage decisions without consulting with his daughter.
Interesting. I didn't know that was like a boilerplate standard or a trend in these myths.
In the sagas, usually there are arranged marriages, and it's arranged between the fathers. But when a father goes against his daughter's wishes, usually the story ends badly.
Yeah.
So the lesson that can be walked away with from those is listen to your daughters or things will go badly.
Yeah.
Whether Helm doesn't consult Hera because he knows that Hera doesn't want to marry Wolf and is trying to represent her wishes because he already knows them, or whether he's overriding her wishes. I guess rather than overriding, disregarding would probably be a better word, since she's not really into marrying Wolf anyway, isn't really specified in the movie.
Yeah, no.
So I think it could be possible that we could also assume that Helm actually knows what Hera would want.
The whole lack of clarity about the Gondorian prince really... I get it. Some people I saw complain about the movie's runtime. I wish that could have been cleared up, at least very briefly, if anything else.
I would have liked to have seen more about the Gondorian prince, yeah.
Going back to Wolf, more things that I thought were illustrative of his character. When he executes Hera's youngest brother, which I don't remember the name of.
Hama.
When he executes Hama, his general directly advises him against it, because otherwise they will hole up in the keep that they're in and not come out, and it's going to be terrible. He doesn't care at all. Like this goes to his impulsiveness, but like I thought that was the most illustrative scene of that. It was very chilling for me, like terrifying.
It's certainly a moment where he goes farther than he's ever gone before.
Right. Yeah. Before this scene, he does slay her older brother, but it's in combat. I feel like that's completely different.
Did he personally do it?
He was, and that was what I was scratching my head, but he was the one who shot that arrow, yes.
Okay. I missed that.
Yeah, he was. I remember I was looking at it and I was like, is that Wolf? Because the archer, it kept cutting back to his face, but he was in a cloak for some reason that he doesn't wear for the rest of the movie. Maybe it was just a random archer, but I think it was supposed to be Wolf.
Okay.
We go back sometime and correct that if we need to, but I'm going to go with it was Wolf. I'm like 80% sure that that's who it was supposed to be.
I know I definitely need to watch the movie a third time.
But yeah, he did. I feel like the older brother on a battlefield is killing. Like, sure, that's a one reason to be angry, but like holding a prisoner and cutting his head off in front of somebody just to watch them be upset is like their family, if not just a prisoner. Like it was just that's like a nasty, horrible, evil thing to do. You know.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's further than he'd ever gone before.
Mm-hmm. Before he just seemed like a scorned but like redeemable person. I felt even declaring war on Edoras, but yeah. Ugh.
Do you think this is the moment where he can't turn back anymore?
I think personally, and I know this is cheesy, but there's always a chance to turn back. But maybe like from a world building or from a Tolkienian perspective, that might be where he crossed a line. Yes. When Saruman wanted to do a turn but got killed by Grima, that would have been an interesting addition or interesting alternate path to have seen. I do love a redeemed villain, even if it's a nasty villain. So Wolf, if he wanted to turn around, I mean, he's the main character, but it would have been cool, especially if this was like a longer, not just a single piece. He would have been a cool person to redeem if that had been an option. The coolest thing here, I think Wolf was sitting in the burnt hall of Edoras, and just that visual was very like it was like very on the nose, but like intense seeing him with the crown he took in the hall that he burnt down.
Why did you think it was on the nose?
I feel like anybody watching it would get that he's sitting on a throne surrounded by like burnt ruins. It's pretty. It echoes back to the proposal where Hera asks him if he wants to be the king of her own kingdom. It is pretty much directly said at that point too earlier.
It is very well foreshadowed. When Wolf was sitting in the burned Edoras, it made me think of a poem from The Lord of the Rings when the Barrow-wights have captured the hobbits. It's not something that happens in the movie. And the poem has the line, "Over dead sea and withered land," referring to what the bad guys would rule over. Mm-hmm. And the Burned Kingdom made me think of the idea that evil will only rule over destruction.
Right, yeah.
So whereas Hera is all about choice and free will, Wolf has a very poor view of free will. He's all about the destiny aspect. Nothing's ever his fault or in his capacity to choose. He has lines like, "I am who your father made me, and I cannot leave," when his general is telling him to leave the siege because Helm is dead. Mm-hmm. And he says, "I can't leave." Well, you can if you do. And this is just something that is set up in his character to have as a theme throughout the movie, that you have your free will character versus your anti-free will character.
Right. And this is something I didn't pick up on, but it is really good. I feel like that is the biggest difference between Wolf's and Hera's character is their views on how, Wolf feels like he can't stop the actions from happening. It's out of his hands, where Hera seems very much to want to take things that are out of her hands and put them into her hands when she has to,
Absolutely. And she only takes things into her hands when no one else is there to take them.
Right, yes.
But
unfortunately,
she will make that choice when the choice needs to be made.
Yeah, no, I'm joking about unfortunately. It makes a lot more sense as we're talking through this as from a literary analysis. But I still think I would have liked a Hera queen.
Hey, fair opinion. Another new low that Wolf sinks to is when he lies to his men about the gold.
Yeah.
Like, that's the one that really got me, because he really seemed to be not looking out for the men that he was in charge of. I mean, did we expect him to be looking out for them? Not really, because he was already that evil. Here he is actually double-crossing his own men.
Right. This is in reference to their pay, wasn't it?
Yeah, he said that there was a bunch of gold in Helm's Deep and that they needed to keep the siege up to get at the gold. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise he'd have a mutinying army. Helm was dead. There is no reason to continue the siege. He is king of Rohan for all intents and purposes.
So for me, this, along with the scene I mentioned where Wolf executes
Hama,
where Wolf executes Hama, it's indicative of him not. It's like he's impulsive, right? But I think this is beyond just like I think he knows the consequences, but he just doesn't. He's like he doesn't care, and I think it's because he doesn't actually care about like winning a long-term peace. He's just trying to destroy this family at any cost, including his own life. I feel like he doesn't care if this sets him up to be miserable and in ruin for the rest of his life. If you lie to a mercenary army about payment, they are going to not be your army anymore. They're going to find somebody else to pay them, and probably somebody with their personal grudge who will pay them to fight you. So they, he's messing with, and I don't think they were actually mercenaries, but still, same principle. When you're paying your soldiers, you want to make sure you're doing that. But I think he, even though he's impulsive, he isn't dumb. He knows this. He just doesn't have a goal of long-term sustainability. He doesn't care what happens to him in the long term as long as he wins this fight now.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I noticed in the movie was the idea that evil is manipulatable. Mm-hmm. Hera is going to use a distraction tactic with a line that evokes Aragorn's line, his eye will be fixed upon me, is what Hera says. Which this strategy of distraction works because evil is very tunnel visioned and doesn't pay attention to things that it doesn't deem important enough. It's, again, that theme of the little things. Mm-hmm. In The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn can have Sauron's eye fixed upon him, and Sauron overlooks the little things like hobbits that are coming in to destroy his ring. Mm-hmm. Here, Hera is going to be distracting Wolf away from her people who are escaping. The little things that Wolf doesn't care about.
Yeah. I didn't notice before this discussion while I was watching the movie or even writing my notes, but how good of maybe a foil or a comparison Hera and Aragorn are to each other. They have a lot of similarities, and the differences that they do have kind of highlight each other's differences, like on purpose. It feels like it was almost planned that way, perhaps.
It's true that I never thought about them together. I'll have to think about that some.
Like our discussion, I used Aragorn as a random example, but like as we're talking more and comparing them, I do kind of see similarities and differences that correlate and coordinate. Well, I feel like maybe the writers were kind of doing that on purpose, but I could be completely off.
Whether the writers intended it or not, I think it works.
Yeah, there's some interesting similarities. But yeah, the fact that Wolf also in this comparison is being compared to Sauron then is also interesting. I think you said, was it this last episode we recorded, that evil can only be evil in one way?
Yeah, that was last episode.
That's this coming up again, like the same kind of trick. Have the like protagonist show up to the evil guy and do a big stand, but it's a distraction to let the small folk get away, or get where they need to go. I guess,
Yeah.
Frodo and Sam weren't getting away, but, they weren't retreating, but it's the same idea.
There are certainly differences in the two situations as well that would also be worthy to unpack, but I was noticing the similarities here.
Yeah, I completely had not. I really wasn't trying to compare it to the Lord of the Rings movies, which maybe I should have gone a second time and seen, but the first time I did just watch it the best I could without that critical analysis that comes
for sure
out when you dissect it.
You're coming at this with the view of a new fan, which is exactly the take that is going to help me see the things that I can't see because I'm too steeped in the lore.
As I'm enjoying the tower without taking it apart for the bricks yet.
Exactly. Wolf just keeps on making worse and worse choices. He drops his own drummer off the tower. I mean, how are they even going to have a siege without the drummer? Come on. He needs his little drummer boy.
I really, I do feel like, again, like it's self-destruction. He is purposely like burning his resources to the point where like I feel like he knows no matter what, he's not coming out of this alive. He just cares about getting the other people down too.
Yeah. And Wolf just never takes advice. The advisor who told him no and like started a redemption arc because Wolf was just that stupid. Like that guy should have seen it coming that he was going to get stabbed. Wolf's already a loose cannon, doesn't care who he kills. Telling him no is not going to end well if you don't step away quickly.
Yeah, this guy, he just stood next to him as he cut off somebody's head, who was in, feudal society worth way more than the general. So he really should have seen the stab coming. I think you're right. Normally I like to play devil's advocate, be like, no, he totally is reasonable. He didn't expect to be stabbed, but by Wolf of all people.
I'd expect to be stabbed by Wolf.
Yeah, I wouldn't, like, not even talking. Just like being within 20 feet near him, you should expect to be stabbed and be pleasantly surprised when you're not. Like,
yeah.
He's, I liked his character. I liked his, again, I mentioned this earlier, his humanity to his evil was refreshing in Lord of the Rings. I feel like a lot of the evils are much higher. I liked that you could see him like regressing, I guess. I was going to say progressively getting worse. He's regressing. He's thinking less and less clear. He's just a terrifying
He has
character.
a very good villain arc.
Yes. So those were the two main characters, but there was some minor characters too that we liked a lot or wanted to talk about.
Well, I don't think I'd call Helm a minor character.
He's the third most major character after those two.
Hera's the one who we see the story through her eyes. Wolf is the antagonist. Helm is the next one that I got.
And Helm is, like you said, of the 2 pages, kind of the POV character in the appendix, from what I gather.
As much as there is one, yeah.
As much as there is one, okay. He kills Wolf's father. You want to tell me the name of that character?
Freka.
He kills Freka, who is Wolf's father. This is kind of the impetus of the war, I think, for more than anything else, more than the betrothal or anything like that. Is just Wolf is bitter and scorned that his dad was killed. And I get them being upset about it, maybe like drawing swords in the moment, but I feel like, and maybe Wolf being his son, it's different, he gets a pass, but it was a fair duel that Freka had started, both verbally and then physically, and then Helm had accidentally took him out with one hit. I feel like, especially considering that this is based on Anglo-Saxon and some Nordic culture, like they would understand that, like, that's what happens when you get in a fist fight sometimes.
I mean, Helm threw some insults too. It was also, it takes two to tango. It was.
When I say that he started it, I mean that he's the one who said that he wanted to take this into a physical confrontation, which Helm did not step down from at all. He seemed very excited by that and had to be reminded, don't do it inside. But yeah, and then he threw the first hit, and again, like, they both agreed, even if it was Helm's idea and he did it, it was a fair fight. And this is a warrior culture. It felt very odd to me that they were so, like, not that just distraught, but willing to take this to mean he's executed him or something. It'd be different if he, like, had executed him in their eyes, I feel like. I
think that's kind of how they see it, with the one punch that kills him, because he never got a chance to fight back.
Yeah, maybe. And once it started becoming a fight, it was done. It's just a small thing. I mean, it shows that Helm is strong and hot. He's kind of hot-headed too, in the way you'd expect an old king to be, especially in the first half of the movie. He feels like a very prototypical character. He responds to situations how you would expect a middle-aged king who's full of himself to react. He starts to, I feel like, grow near the end, which I do enjoy. He's on the battlefield, which I love about medieval, like, leaders versus modern day leaders. Is, if you're going to go and start a war, you're going to be out there with them. I get why it's not a good idea, but it is interesting, and I like that about historically and in fiction, when you see the king on the battlefield.
I like the idea that a leader goes into the danger that he sends his people to.
Right, yeah. It's heroic.
It is. So the mightiest man may be slain by one arrow, and Boromir may have been pierced by many, but Helm survives his wounds.
He does. He is wearing plate armor, but yeah, it doesn't. He is injured on the battlefield by a bunch of arrows. They get him pretty good.
Yeah, and then they pull him back, and
right.
And then we start getting into the legend of Helm Hammerhand.
I feel like at this point, Helm shifts personality a lot in stuff, but
he's lost 2 of his kids and had a near-death experience himself. It does a number to you.
Definitely, yeah, and he's processing it all while under siege by the person who did it. So what he does is he sneaks in and out and just starts beating people up using. I thought he was turning invisible or passing through the walls to using a ring of power because they kept calling him a wraith, but apparently it was just because he was being sneaky. Does that sound right?
Yes. And in fact, I love the balance that the movie strikes between maintaining the legend of the ghost of Helm Hammerhand and showing consistency with what we know of human metaphysics, because he doesn't have a ring of power. He isn't a wraith. He's not a ghost. His spirit hasn't been maintained behind or anything. It's sleight of hand and some sneakiness that's letting him create this legend. People are saying he's a wraith because they need some explanation for it. They're really creeped out by him. He can't be an actual man, even though he is.
It's almost like the metaphorical Eye of Sauron versus the literal Eye of Sauron. Like if they had made him actually turn into a wraith and go through the walls, it would have felt like the film adaptation of the giant literal eye on the tower. Where calling him a wraith is, they might be more speaking poetically or as a title, just like...
They believe he's a wraith.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them didn't. I mean, they're a group of a lot of people, so maybe some of the soldiers don't.
Sure, maybe some of them don't believe it, but it is proposed as a real explanation of what's happening.
It's the predominant theory.
Well, it's like when you hear a story about a haunted house. You know, if the house down the street is haunted and you hear someone saying there's ghosts in there, you might not believe there's ghosts in there, but someone does.
True. Yeah, got it.
Someone believes that he is actually a wraith. And
as the story, as it goes on, he does, in memory and in legend, become a wraith, even if he literally wasn't one.
Certainly in legend, he becomes a wraith. And in fact, Helm's legend is his greatest weapon. He strikes so much fear into Wolf's army with the power of this legend. The legend is fear. And by not saving himself at the gates, by saving Hera and then turning back to fight himself, he is maintaining his legend as a ghost. His sacrifice ends up being a key part of the eucatastrophe for the entire movie.
Yeah.
He cannot become more than he already is. He already is a legend. He needs to die before he strips himself of the power of that legend.
Right. Because if he hadn't died and then had the cousin ends up riding into battle wearing his helm, and that's what makes everybody think we've seen him all die and now he's back. Is that what's happening?
A smart Dunlanding would be able to recognize that the funeral happened after he was frozen to death outside, and so he hadn't been a wraith that entire time. But it's also easy to forget that one little bit and maintain the story of the wraith, because he's not adding on yet more discontinuity with it. He's not adding on actions of the living to his legendary wraith-like existence.
Yeah, and then folklore, being the way it is, people take the part where they're telling the story about him getting them and killing them as a wraith stealthily, and then they all saw him die, but like they'll condense all of that and take out the context that makes it more detailed. Not like on purpose. It's not like one specific person trying to make the big narrative of this it's just as the story gets passed along, that's how legends work. Just the parts that stick together and make sense and make a good story stick, right? So it is pretty interesting. I thought this was kind of in the bigger picture of the whole movie. Helm and Helm's Deep was I know at the end there's more, but like this is the connection to Lord of the Rings. We call it Helm's Deep as we're discussing it, and this is Helm, and it's his deep, and why it's there, and why he's still talked about, and what's interesting about it.
And he blows the horn when he's about to go out, and
right.
So the sound of the blowing of the horn is terrifying to the Dunlandings who are at the Battle of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers.
Because it's referencing this very story exactly. It feels like almost like a a classical fable about like why something is named that way. Like that was a very classical myth style in real mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And so this myth of why it's called Helm's Deep, the real story of it is pretty cool, quote unquote real story. But like why that it's called Helm's Deep, there's a myth about it, and then the actual history of it. It's interestingly layered, just like a Tolkien work should be, you know.
And I think it's really interesting that the Dunlendings who are at Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, when they hear the horn of Helm Hammerhand blowing, they're probably wondering if Helm Hammerhand's ghost is going to show up and kill them.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that's what I was wondering if I heard Helm Hammerhand mentioned in the trilogy, but that's where it would have been, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let the horn of Helm Hammerhand sound in the deep one last time. So next up we have Olwen.
Olwen was my favorite, hands down.
She was pretty awesome. She reminds me of an elderly Éowyn.
That's a really good comparison. She was just, you know, some of the characteristics you said about Hera. She was plucky. She, like, you know, wouldn't get knocked down. Elderly Éowyn's really good, actually, though. I like that a lot.
Hera and Éowyn do have a lot in common, but Hera does not remind me of Éowyn. Hera is...
I'm sorry, Olwen. Hera reminds me of Olwen. Like, they're characters in the same thing. Like, I feel like I see Olwen, like, as she was, like, the retainer, but, like, as, like, a motherly figure for Hera, almost. And some of her pluckiness comes from Olwen, I would say. I see some...
Olwen is a shield maiden.
Yeah.
And it's that shield maidenness that really stands out to me with the elderly Éowyn vibes.
Yeah. Yeah, I just mean some of Hera's personality, at least in my headcanon, I don't know if this is ever said, but came from when she was young seeing Olwen.
I'm sure, yeah.
Like I feel like she was an influence on Hera. Yeah, Éowyn and Olwen, I definitely see the connection. I don't see a very big one between, like you said, Hera and Éowyn.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some superficial stuff, but nothing worth writing home about.
Yeah.
But yeah, Olwen for me, I felt like she was almost Hera's mother figure, since her actual mom's not around. Like in the court, like as a kid, I could see her like looking up to her, and sometimes even like being cared for her. Like that was just my headcanon, though.
Yeah,
nothing in the movie was said about it.
I could see it though. I think my favorite moment with Olwen was where she points out the difference between custom and law.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a very insightful distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, Olwen, there was a couple times, twice, I thought she was going to die. I thought for sure she was going to be like the first one to die when she had to rescue Hera. And then again, I thought she was going to be the last one to die with Hera on the bridge as the army is charging in.
But she makes it.
She makes it, which I'm happy for. Like, I would have been really sad if she got taken down.
Next up, we have Leaf. I have a hot take.
Oh.
Leaf is totally a hobbit. He seems older than his size would indicate,
mm-hmm.
and he's short, and he's got the hair.
Mm-hmm. I see it, but I feel like... Go on. I'm sorry. I'll give my final thoughts after the full...
Let me keep making my case here.
Right.
So, Leaf has a moment in the story where he knows the seals on the scrolls that he's carrying. And Hera could never have made the connection that she does, where she realizes she needs to evacuate the city without him. This just feels like a very hobbity contribution to me. He has all this book knowledge about, medieval Europe and adventures and all kinds of nerdy stuff, basically. And then to have this be the conduit through which Hera is able to save the civilians is one of those little hobbity contributions that ends up having huge ramifications. Leaf isn't the major hero of this scene,
mm-hmm.
but without his contribution, all of Edoras' citizens would have been burned.
Right, yeah.
I also think that the old woman with the chest, the short old woman, she might also be a hobbit. Not as convinced on this one, but she's also very short.
She was a great minor character, I just want to say.
Yeah, no, she was a very interesting minor character. I just feel like she might also be cast into that hobbity role. She sees to the harp being passed on. She sees to the future of stories and songs, which seems a very hobbity role to me. But getting back to Leaf, Leaf does the whole I want to fight by your side, Eowyn type thing. But when Hera sends Leaf away to protect the people, he actually follows instructions, unlike Eowyn.
Yeah.
So good on him for actually doing what he's told. Somebody can lead the people to safety.
Yeah, he saves lives doing it too.
And then in the caves afterwards, he tells stories to lift the children's hearts, and that's such a hobbity thing to do as well.
Right, yeah, definitely.
So that is why I believe that Leaf is a hobbit.
Do you think that Leaf is a hobbit that grew up in somewhere, a hobbit society, and came back, or he is like a misidentified human?
I think that he is probably a hobbit who has traveled to Rohan and is existing in their adventures because he loves seals and wants to see the greater world, just an adventurous hobbit. Remember that Rohan is the only culture who actually retains a memory of hobbits.
Right. I feel like, and maybe this would have been clearer in a different depiction, I feel like Leaf may have like had hobbit blood or something, but or was like part hobbit, maybe a half bit or something.
I think that's a hotter take than mine.
I don't know in Middle Earth how that would play out or work, and I know there's some messy stuff about that sort of thing though. But I feel like he might have like a great grandfather who's a hobbit, is pretty likely too. Just because he kind of looks like one, and then maybe some of like the hobbit's behavioral traits could be passed on genetically. But again, like I want to be very careful talking about this because bioessentialism in Tolkien is a very wide and diverse topic that I have read a lot about, and I know it's messy no matter what you say about it.
Well, hobbits are related to men. They have the same afterlife as men, so in that sense, they are men. In that sense, they are humans. There's no recorded matches of a hobbit and a human. I don't know how that would necessarily work. Anyway, talking about Hama, we got Hama up next. He's the one who is executed at the...
I remember his name now. Right,
okay. So let's talk about Hama. You had a note.
Yeah, Hama ultimately gets captured because... his horse fails him kind of. I am reading your notes, so I know it's a she, but she peters out and starts to be out of breath, and it's really sweet because he's reassuring her. Hama seemed like such a honestly, all of these characters, I'm surprised how interesting they made them with such a short amount of time. I think we'll save this for later near the end, but it should have been a mini series. I want more Hama. I want more of the older brother. Seemed like an interesting character too. Haleth. It seemed like an interesting. All of these characters, they just had so much personality that came out so quickly, and it would have been cool to see things develop. Anyway, he gets captured because his horse fails, and I was wondering, like, did he just not have a war horse? Was it just a regular riding horse or a workhorse of some sort?
Earlier in the movie, they mentioned that his horse was old and that he should take a different horse who was younger. Oh. And he says, oh, no, he wants to take his horse because she's a solid horse.
Yeah.
But she is too old for this, and she breaks down.
Yeah, Hama definitely, like, every scene he was in, I wanted more. I so wish there was more Hama. I wish somehow they incorporated him maybe in the Oliphant scene, somewhere else in the movie, please, if you do another take of this for some reason.
He was the one singing in the beginning.
Helm begging to take Hama's place was very, very touching too. I feel like this is a scene where maybe that specific moment was when Helm went from an archetypical character or a flat character to like a real character with depth and around, different sides and angles
I can see that
granularity. And it's a good kind of, I don't know, the writers, like, they cutting it there and making him all of a sudden seem like a real person instead of like a stereotype it caught me off guard. I loved it.
I'm glad they kept Hama's death off screen though.
Yeah.
that would have been far too bloody and brutal to see it. I liked being able to watch the entire movie.
Even Hama and Hera's older brother, Haleth, his death of being shot in the neck by an arrow was very brutal. I felt like for the screen too, and they didn't hide it; they showed it all. Like
I didn't struggle watching that one though.
It I don't know. Neck stuff gets me, like Wolf's death.
I feel like I would have struggled to watch Hama be executed at the gate.
It would have been 100 times worse. I'm not arguing, but yeah. So, like I said earlier, the depiction of death in this movie was already rough enough.
Mm-hmm.
That one, and like just knowing how this movie art and betrayed and depicted it, the situation depicted it enough that actually showing it on top of it would have been gratuitous, I feel too.
Yeah. So I really liked how they depicted that.
Yeah.
I noted that Hama fell at the gates of the Hornburg just like Hama in the Two Towers does.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a character named Hama in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
He's not really in the movies like he is in the books.
Oh, well, that's why.
But he's killed at the gates of the Hornburg in the Two Towers, and Hama, I think it's the gates of the Hornburg, but he's killed at the Battle of Helm's Deep, and this Hama is also killed in about the same spot. It just kind of made me think of
interesting
of the other one named Hama. Letting it rot is such an insult,
it is.
It made me think of the reference to hewing Hama's body as he lay dead, like Theoden references in the Two Towers.
Oh, is that like an expression he uses?
Yeah.
Right. That's really good. They took that expression and made this whole moment. I really like that they did that a couple times.
No, I think I need to be more clear. In The Lord of the Rings, Theoden references hewing Hama's body even as he lay dead when he's talking to Saruman later on, and he's referencing this basically as noting how disrespectful to the dead Saruman's forces have been.
Right.
And I'm noting that letting War of the Rohirrim Hama's body rot is also a form of disrespect to the dead.
Right.
The Hamas who die at Helm's Deep get disrespected after they're dead.
The two Hamas is confusing this a lot, but I get what you're saying now. The tale of two Hamas.
So next up, I wanted to talk about the orcs.
Yeah, there's orcs, and I was confused if orcs were just sometimes not from, but they were from Mordor.
Yep, these orcs are from Mordor.
Explained. And they're blanket instructed to look for the rings. I was like...
Yep, they're just told to go look for rings. This is something that the movie threw in. I thought it was really cool that the orcs are voiced by the actors who play Merry and Pippin.
I did see that after the fact, too.
Me too. I didn't know it was until I was watching the
I want to go
credits.
back and watch the movie again for that now, too. But yeah, I saw that after the fact. I was like, oh, I wish I had caught that. I knew it was Eowyn, though, from the intro. I didn't need to read for that. But yeah, I didn't catch it was Merry and Pippin. I wondered if there was like some sort of guess, but I didn't think it was Merry and Pippin. I didn't get Platoon 2.
I didn't get it till the credits, and then I watched it again, and it was extra fun.
Yeah.
So I do take some issue with this scene, because I don't think Sauron would ever send his orcs to go look for rings.
Right.
That's not information given to every rank and file orc.
Mm-hmm.
Orcs would be corrupted by the ring. They'd keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
So I didn't particularly like that particular choice.
Maybe Sauron somehow knows that they would be corrupted, but could, like, orcs are already evil, so they're the most predictable things ever, what they would do with the ring, and he could get it really easily if one of his orcs found it. I don't know. Again, I always try to reinterpret things in a good fashion, but yeah, it does seem... I did even, wonder, are these special orcs?
No, I don't think so.
They didn't seem to be, though, no.
Yeah, so not really my favorite part of the movie, but I did like that they were voiced by Merry and Pippin, so I did enjoy the scene.
I don't know. I feel like it was pretty cool to see him looking for the rings, but it does fall apart once you start to think about it.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. I'd
have just left the scene out.
Yeah, there was Saruman there. That surprised me way more than the orcs. And it was I learned it's actually voiced by Christopher Lee. I thought it was a good impression or AI, but it was archival footage, right?
Yes.
Archival voice recordings.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I I was surprised to see him. That's for sure.
Another thing that I didn't like quite as much was that I think it would have been more interesting if Saruman had been interested in talking to Hera about the rings rather than Gandalf. Because
Ooh.
to me, I don't think it makes as much sense for Gandalf to be interested in rings at this point as Saruman.
They just wanted to name drop Gandalf.
They wanted to name drop Gandalf.
I couldn't imagine how much different the ending would be, though, if they said we have to go and find a wise wizard named Saruman who wants to talk to us about some rings. They'd be like, oh, that she's in danger, and not the Gandalf isn't going to hurt Hera, but Saruman might.
Well, Saruman isn't evil at this point,
right?
Or at least not. Like he may be thinking some things, but like he hasn't done anything bad yet.
Yeah, but
as far as I know.
Him versus Gandalf, he has the propensity and the ability to. Or I don't imagine Gandalf would hurt somebody unless they were a danger to others.
Yeah, no, Gandalf's a good guy.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna go see Gandalf. Is like, ooh, that sounds like an interesting adventure. Where we're gonna go see Saruman's like, well, that sounds like I already know the conflict. It's gonna be a big one, you know.
But it could go fine with Saruman, is my point, because Saruman isn't the Saruman of this era is not the Saruman that we know in Lord of the Rings.
That's true. And I mean, the Saruman in Lord of the Rings, we see him do his big reveal and twist, right?
Exactly.
So that's when he is bad.
He hasn't ventured into industrialization yet. So that is all the character analysis we have. How would you grade the characters?
This was the best part of the movie for me. The characters, most of them had a lot going for them. There was a lot of interesting interpersonal dynamics. Even the characters like Hama, who didn't have much screen time, I wanted to see more of. They had like their personalities, like I said, popped. There was no avoiding it. It's like honestly just a really strong depiction of these characters. Some of the best I've seen, like generally speaking, ever for like making you interested in characters that you're not in, you don't know much about, you know, like with so little time getting you so invested in them.
I agree with everything you said. What grade are you landing on?
10 out of 10 for me.
I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10 just because I didn't like the orcs.
Yeah, I guess the orcs were technically characters. I don't know. But I liked them. I'd keep it in there ultimately, but that's where we can agree to disagree, and it's like a very short scene.
It's the first time I'm giving a lower number than you.
Yeah, which is interesting. I didn't expect it to go that way.
I just wanted to reflect the orcs somewhere in the score, and that's where I'm choosing to reflect that.
That's fair. It's fair.
I could give the writing a lower score if I wanted to attribute it there.
Yeah.
You know, so whether I'm knocking half a point off in the characters or knocking half a point off in the writing, I'm knocking half a point off for the orcs.
It's still coming from somewhere.
So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was references to the New Line Cinema movies or the books and how these references landed. Because you can do references well or you can do references badly. I think overall, most of the references were pretty good.
Okay.
So the first thing I noticed was that Éowyn's prologue made me think of Galadriel's prologue from the movies.
I was sitting there for a minute thinking, is this Galadriel? It sounded like it for a good minute until I was listening. I was like, no, that's not her voice. Who is that? It took me a minute to come to Éowyn.
Yeah. And just like Galadriel's prologue really works to immerse you in the world, it really drags you in. It works with Éowyn's prologue too.
Yeah.
The trick hasn't lost any of its effect for being done again.
Mm-hmm.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, the narrative, like telling a story, it really does. It is a great start to just any general fantasy work. You know, like no wonder Lord of the Rings does it so often in the film adaptations.
Mm-hmm. So the next thing was that you had a question.
So yeah, I was having trouble keeping straight all of these different men. For lack of a better word, the humans who team up with Sauron, they have a history with Rohirrim?
With Rohan. There's, like you said, there's a couple different groups of humans. The Dunlendings do not have a connection to Sauron in the books.
Okay.
That's the people that Freka and Wolf come from.
Okay.
But there's the other group of humans, the Southrons, with the Oliphants, who those do end up with Sauron in The Lord of the Rings, and do not end up in Rohan in the books.
Right. So I always have a hard time even pronouncing it. That's why I answered Dunlendings.
Dunlendings.
Dunlendings. Are they in the present story at all?
Yes.
Okay. They're in Lord of the Rings films.
Do you remember the scene in the Two Towers where the guy cuts his palm and says, "We'll bleed for Saruman"?
Right. Yeah.
He's a Dunlending.
Okay.
And Saruman tells them that the people of Rohan have stolen their lands, and he incites them to anger.
Okay.
That's Freka and Wolf's people.
Okay. Got it.
So yeah, there's bad blood between the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim from before the Lord of the Rings.
So Wolf is in Isengard and is where he's like centering this this attack, right? This is where him and his people meet up. And I don't remember who it was, but somebody in the group mentioned that this is like a cursed or evil place. I swore I heard it.
I don't remember that reference. That doesn't mean it's not there. There are things in the movie I missed.
If this was a sequel, it would have made sense since Saruman was doing all his evil orcs stuff there, you know?
Yeah, but he hasn't done any of that.
So there's no reason that you're aware of that this place is specifically bad?
No. This tower was made by the Numenorians. It's a fine place.
Seems fine. Let's not take it apart brick by brick. Analyze it.
Not even the Ents can take apart Isengard. So Helm casting out Freyalaf reminds me of the Banishing of Eomer. I'm sure it's supposed to, but it didn't land badly for me. But it casts Freyalaf and Eomer in a certain comparative light. The scene where Olwen and Hera are talking overlooking the camp outside Edoras really drove home to me just what huge forces were in Lord of the Rings. Edoras is about to be taken out by this little camp of people that they can see the entire thing as they're looking from the porch of the Golden Hall. Mm. That entire field would have been filled with orcs if this was a Lord of the Rings battle.
Yeah.
But Edoras can be taken out by this small little force. It just really illustrated to me just how massive the battles in Lord of the Rings are meant to be.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it was a good comparison.
I really liked it when Helm said, "Arise, arise now," in his battle speech. It cast Theoden in a role of quoting a memorable speech. It would be like if someone, quoted the Gettysburg Address or the I Have a Dream speech or, some other...
if a modern politician reference, we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
Or if somebody quoted Julius Caesar or some great speech, it's going to seem different than if it's your own speech. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I just really liked the idea that Theoden could be referencing a speech that Helm gave years ago. That did sit well with me.
It makes Theoden seem smarter and more knowledgeable.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's why I like it, is because it would mean that Theoden knows his history and he's purposely trying to evoke Rohirric culture and history.
Yeah, which really, it does. I want to see that scene now after watching this film, too.
I really like the Rohirric funeral chant. It's the same song that Éowyn sings in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Mm-hmm. And so I liked hearing that again. When Leaf is taking the people to the caves through the secret tunnel, it's described as secret, and safe. So that one was a subtle one, but it still stood out to me that something was described as secret and safe. Just thought it was funny. Didn't bother me. And I also noticed that when Freyalaf comes back at the end of the movie, he's silhouetted against the moon, whereas Éomer was silhouetted by the sunrise. Yeah,
that's a pretty interesting one. When I saw that, I was like, huh.
Again, I really liked it. It made Freyalaf's eucatastrophe seem different than Éomer's at the same time as we're drawing a comparison with them. So that reference sat well with me. So let's give a grade to the references. How do you feel the references landed for you?
I didn't know, I didn't catch nearly as many. The ones that you told me about, though, I really liked. I think every one of them I didn't. Sometimes the reference does feel like shoehorned. None of them did. I think just only because I didn't catch as many, I feel bad for giving it a 10 on 10. But like a good 8.5 out of 10. And if I were more well versed in the Lord of the Rings lore and pacing, it would have been higher.
I mean, feel free to give it a 10 out of 10 if you think that's what it deserved for you. This is about your experience.
Yeah, I'm just, in my experience, I didn't catch as many as I'd have liked.
But the ones you caught sat well with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, then I don't see the reason for an 8.5, but don't let me talk you out of your
I'll give
score.
it a 10 then.
Okay. So for me, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10
Mm-hmm.
for reasons we have not discussed yet. I decided to put the references I didn't like under the things I didn't like section.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to explain that later on.
Okay.
There's specifically one reference that really bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything I talked about in the last few minutes was something I really liked. A lot of them landed well. So next we have some topics, issues, themes, different stuff to talk about. So
Yeah.
the first one is the Edoras versus Helm's Deep scandal.
No, I thought that Helm arguing with Freyalif about evacuation was like Gandalf and Theoden fighting, but better, because Helm seems much more like the type to make a decision to stay and fight rather than Gandalf. You know, it just it feels like what that argument was supposed to be.
I agree with you that this was better than what was in the Two Towers as far as the conflict goes. And especially since we spent so much time talking about this conflict in our podcast, when this became an issue in the movie, I thought this was so funny.
Yeah.
This whole thing casts Theoden's conviction to go to Helm's Deep in a tradition of kings. Theoden would have known this history, and he would have known that Helm staying at Edoras was the wrong decision.
Right. Yeah. It again adds to Theoden. This movie makes Theoden seem really smart.
Yeah, it seems like Theoden really knows his history, is how this movie ends up painting it.
Yeah.
In the interest of not repeating history, Theoden learns that he should be going to Helm's Deep. And the thing is, this doesn't really assuage any of my complaints with my original point that I made. I still think it lands badly in the original movie to have Gandalf and Theoden arguing about this, because obviously you should go to Helm's Deep. Mm-hmm. But I do find some vindication in this that the point needs addressing.
Yeah. Maybe Gandalf knew Theoden was a big history nerd and just wanted to give him a moment where he could be where he could be held or correct Helm's mistake.
Love it.
That's the only good take on that. That's the only way is Gandalf was just completely messing with him and knew he would say no. But
so next up I want to talk about the eagles.
Yes.
I made a note every time I saw an eagle. At least one.
Yeah, there was a lot.
And there was a lot of eagles. So the eagles opened the movie. The note I wrote was that the eagles bring you catastrophe, and they also bring an awesome movie. So
this movie is the catastrophe.
Yes. Hera feeds the eagles. And, doing well by the eagles in the beginning of the movie really pays off by the end.
Definitely does.
The eagles show up several times. They swoop and they cry a few different times in the movie. Every time it's heralding some sort of silver lining or reminding us that things will work out or bringing us hope. Every time they swoop, there seemed to be some sort of a meaning to it, reminding us that they're still there. Then Hera climbs to the eagles, and this isn't in The Lord of the Rings directly. It reminded me of Eärendil sailing to Valinor. Eärendil's the guy who becomes the star in Frodo's glass.
Okay.
He has to sail to talk to the gods, to ask them to intervene to save the world.
Oh, really?
And Hera's making a journey to ask the eagles to intervene to save them. Kind of reminded me of, the idea of going to a place to ask for divine intervention. I really liked that they didn't make the eagles talk.
Yeah. I do want to ask why you think, is there an in-lore reason that they aren't talking in this one?
I just think it would have been silly if they'd have been talking.
Don't they talk in the other Lord of the Rings films?
They do not talk in the films.
In the books they do.
Right.
I remember them talking in the Hobbit book, but they don't talk in the films. Got it. That's where my confusion was.
They talk in the Hobbit books, and speech is recounted from them in the Lord of the Rings books, like Gandalf telling stories where he talked to the eagles.
And he said the eagles said, so,
yeah.
So right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I get it then. This is going to be a bit of an issue as we get into the Hobbit movies, but I'm going to be remembering things from a book I read a long time ago. I'm going to try not to, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I just thought not making the eagle talk was a good adaptation choice. I think a talking eagle would have landed poorly in this kind of medium, especially with it being animated. It could have been so corny if they made the eagle talk.
Yeah.
It would have been so easy to do that.
Definitely.
By not making it talk, I think it was a great choice.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an interesting point you make about adaptations in books in general. Some things just don't translate well and need to be changed somehow. And I feel like talking animals is definitely one of them. Like, you can't have a serious talking animal anymore in a movie. It's very hard to do if there's also non-animals too. It seems like the talking character is always going to be like a silly character, unless you're making a movie with all talking animals or something.
I agree with your point about all animals versus including other characters. I think it can be challenging. I think it can be done, but it's definitely a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
And by sidestepping this challenge, I think it was a good choice.
Right. So I was thinking about very briefly what you said about the Eagles. Generally, they always usher in like good news, and they basically embody like eucatastrophe in a way.
Yes.
I feel like Hera feeding them in the beginning is kind of saying like doing good deeds gathers the favor of fortune. Like being a good person causes good things to happen to you. Like if the eagles are kicking metaphorically.
Absolutely.
And also feeding the eagles too, you know.
Mm-hmm. So the core of the eucatastrophe in this story lies in the timing of Freyalof's return. Freyalof rides over the hill just in time to save Helm's Deep from disaster.
Right, okay, got it.
The eagle agreeing to help could also not be counted on. Remember that eucatastrophe is that turn that you can't count on.
Yes.
So, first of all, the eagle could have said no. But it was still possible that even if the eagle said yes, that the eagle couldn't get there in time for Freyalof to save the day.
Right.
So the real eucatastrophe to me lies in the timing of Freyalof's arrival. And at that moment, the eagle swoops in to herald Freyalof.
Yes, it does hammer home again how these eagles always are the embodiment of eucatastrophe. I feel like is a good way to put it.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a good theme to note, like throughout all of the films.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the role of chance.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest place I saw chance in the movie was when Hera is in the barn.
And she is, or you wrote Lord Thorne. Is this the guy?
That's the traitor. Yeah,
he decides to try execute Hera or kill her like while nobody's looking. Because she figures out that he is a traitor, right? And luckily her horse is there and stops him, and he falls onto a pitchfork that she was trying to get as a weapon. So I do feel like you got to consider how many times a horse might have stopped a murder. I never really thought about it before, but like that's horses are friends with their owners a lot of times.
Yep.
And they're very big and imposing. So it's like, kind of like having a dog. It's a very interesting consideration versus a car.
A horse can make a lot better decisions than a car can.
Yeah, for now.
We really took a step down with this industrialization.
You can't get home drunk in a car, but you can get home drunk on a horse. They'll take you right there.
Exactly. You can't drunk drive a horse.
The horse will just drive itself.
I also thought that the method of Lord Thorne's death was fantastic. Mm-hmm. This is where the chance comes in, that he was kicked by a horse into a pitchfork. It's about the smallest amount of moral culpability that Hera could have. Mm-hmm. It's his evil is what killed him, and a little bit of Iluvatar's work.
And a horse.
But, I mean, Iluvatar's probably telling the horse what to do.
Yeah. In this scene, Iluvatar was a horse.
So the next themes I wanted to talk about were the themes that we hit up in our lore segment last time from the Beowulf essay. I wanted to talk about the wages of heroism and northern courage.
Helith dying just definitely caught me off guard. Just like, and I mentioned this many times earlier, but just death in general in this film was depicted in such a good way where it was intense and shocking and startling to see.
Mm-hmm. And when I saw Helith's death, I immediately thought about the wages of heroism is death, because he's standing there giving a heroic speech and then bam, he's dead. He's literally killed for his heroism.
Yeah, I didn't even put together he was giving a very uplifting speech. That added to the impression of like the suddenness of the arrow hitting him.
Yep. Helm trying to tear Wolf's army apart, one soldier at a time, was something I thought was an example of northern courage, because you got this hopeless siege, and in the face of impossible odds, Helm is going to do what he can do to try to do what's right anyway.
Yeah.
And so in the face of impossible odds, he's going out and he's going to try to defeat an entire army single-handed. Is a pretty impossible task.
Yeah, definitely is.
Finally, Helm's death was another example of the wages of heroism is death. In order to be a true hero, he needs to be dead. His life can only make him less of a hero at this point.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, if he had somehow lived and everyone knew it, the scene where Freyleth returns, I mean, it might have been enough to rout them, but might not have been. His legend kind of was the extra oomph that needed. Exactly.
To be a hero, he needed to be dead for that trick with Freyalof to work.
Yeah, definitely.
So next, we kind of already have been talking about it because of our talk about Hera and Wolf, but free will versus destiny. It was a big theme throughout the movie. By casting Wolf and Hera as opposites in this theme, the movie shows that those who believe in their ability to choose will come out on top. Hera encourages those around her to own their free will, while Wolf's presence could be seen to encourage complacent acceptance in his men.
You see, just earlier in this episode, I was reading through your notes and came to this conclusion on my own from your notes. They were so pointedly to this, and I missed it during the movie. I thought I was being creative and clever, but that was the whole point.
That was the whole point.
That was the whole point. Your notes were very organized in a way in the Hera and Wolf section to illustrate this and lead to it in foreshadowing, and I thought I was being clever by pointing it out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was well done. I definitely got what you were putting down, but I'm sorry if I spoiled your moment.
No worries, it's fine. So next theme is hope, always a big theme in Tolkien adaptations. And the message I got from the movie on this was that the hope bringers are a vital part of the team of the good guys. Whether it's Leaf telling stories in the caves or Hera using her pretty words, I really like how the movie places emphasis on the actions of the little people that bring hope.
Hera, and also to a lesser extent all the other people who managed to save, like you said, Leaf, they felt almost like that Éowyn and Pippin dynamic. Was it Pippin the one who was with Éowyn, or was it Merry? I'm sorry.
Merry.
That Éowyn and Merry thing reminded me a lot of Hera and Leaf, although, like, again, Éowyn and Hera aren't that similar characters. Just you don't expect them, it's like the prototypical warrior we were talking about, like with the Northern Courage heroism in classic stories with Helm are like standing and fighting, whereas people who are less strong in that sense have to be strong in another way, and that's what the hope is, right? They have to be strong of character and of mind and volition.
So that was all the themes that I wanted to talk about. What kind of a grade would you give the themes?
I think, honestly, these themes, like, seeing them come together is one of my favorite parts of the movie. I don't have any issues, really, with the themes. I don't see any reason not to give 10 out of 10. It's not just inoffensive. It was great.
Awesome. So one last thing for us to talk about before we tally up our final grades. Was there anything in the movie that didn't work for you?
The thing I mentioned was the animation at the beginning. Kind of didn't like it. That's all. And as it went on, that went away.
Okay. I have a few bones to pick.
Right.
Some of these are some things that I don't care so much about, just slight things. Some of them I care about a little bit more. It was a pretty small thing, but I think the movie could have done more with Freka's prophecy. It doesn't quite materialize. It's also, prophecy is also a strong word, but Freka promises that Hera will beg on her knees to marry Wolf, and Hera does ask Wolf if agreeing to marry him would save her people, but she never is on her knees and she never really begs. She's sitting on the ground.
She like more like just as hypothetically like, well, if I did that, would you stop? I think that's why Wolf gets really mad. He's like, if you marry me, what are you talking about? If you marry me, or something like that.
Yeah.
I feel like I liked what it was doing there a bit, but I could see why it wasn't like a true, like, she wasn't on her knees begging, but he's saying that.
I liked the scene fine between Hera and Wolf. It was just in light of Freka's prophecy that I felt like more could have been done, but to work those two scenes together.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But that was a small thing, Didn't ruin the movie or anything for me. Another small thing was the Gondorian princeling never really materializes even in the story, even though he's kind of the reason that everything started.
Yeah, that is something that did kind of... I mentioned earlier in this episode even, did not understand why that was the case.
Yeah, so it didn't really work for me.
I would actually like to insert here real quick, but if they were working on a betrothal, which typically would mean an alliance, why they weren't interested... not like in an oath sense, but just in own self-interest. Why wasn't any Gondorian forces coming out to take a look at what was going on here? I mean, I guess it was quick, but by the time they were in a siege, you think they would have showed up too.
I'm sure Gondor had something else going on.
They were busy.
They are next door to Mordor.
Yeah, that's true.
There's usually something going on.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends how big of a deal this princeling is in Gondor, though. I mean, if it's like the crown prince, like they want to make sure the bride's okay.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how far into the negotiations of the betrothal they were.
That's true. Yeah, there's a couple of... they could have gone a lot of ways with it.
It apparently wasn't unbreakable, or they wouldn't be proposing the idea that Wolf be her betrothed.
True. I just mean there's a lot of ways that the movie could have gone with, including this, like you said, the Gondorian prince.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple ways I feel like he could have been included.
Yeah. And he wasn't.
It was dropped. I feel like they forgot it.
Yeah, I feel like more could have been done with it. Next thing, when Hera's mentioning of the earth shaking after wondering what beast the corpse may have mastered, seems like an unlikely accurate guess on Hera's part.
Uh-huh.
Like she just comes up with Oliphants out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's more beasts than Oliphants. It just seemed a bit unlikely to me. Once again, not the biggest deal.
It does feel like kind of like a shoehorn reference that I was talking about earlier. Although I didn't really catch it. It didn't really clock on my viewing experience.
Yeah, it just seems unlikely that she'd be so on the nose so quickly.
Yeah.
But like I said, relatively small thing. Olwen makes a reference to the blood of the ancients, which totally isn't a thing. I have no idea what she's talking about.
Huh. Yeah, that's weird.
So I'd like more explanation on that. I didn't care for it since I didn't understand it.
Right.
Another smaller thing was when in the battle Hera drops an Oliphant with one ballista.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed a little tough to entirely knock over the entire Oliphant with one arrow, albeit a heavy arrow, but it was just one arrow and the entire beast fell over.
Mm-hmm.
It was a funny anime sequence. And it reminded me of the Minas Tirith block almost dropping on that ugly-faced orc Gothmog in the movie. So it's not that the scene didn't have any redemptive qualities, but I didn't particularly care for it.
I will say ballistas are siege weapons used to attack like fortresses or I think typically the mounted ones on the walls of castles would be used to attack other siege weapons like trebuchets and covered wagons. They're not just a crossbow, but yeah, it also aiming and operating one of that is a siege weapon on your own is difficult. On the other hand, too,
I think elephants are siege weapons in Civ 6.
Yeah, they're definitely weapons in Civ 6. Are they siege weapons? Maybe.
When you get the special characters who have elephants, I think they're
siege.
I think they're considered siege weapons.
That's fun.
So those were the minor complaints I have. The larger complaints I have with the movie. Were specific things like the orcs. We already talked about them.
Yeah.
The orcs looking for rings is a problem for me. And the other two things I have is that, one, I am not particularly fond of the Rohirrim charge screaming death. This is immediately after I do like Helm saying, "Arise, arise," and that reference with Theoden.
Yeah.
Just as much as I like that, I do not like everyone screaming death afterwards.
Right.
When everyone screams death afterwards, that kind of makes it a cultural thing that the Rohirrim just scream death when they run into war.
Yeah.
That makes it seem less desperate to me in The Lord of the Rings in that context.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really feel like these Rohirrim feel like they're dying with their backs to the wall the same way that the Rohirrim in The Lord of the Rings feel like they are running into absolute death.
Yeah, there's not really a good reason for them to be screaming death other than it being a cultural thing, which, like you said, makes the death scream less interesting and like shocking in the original Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so I don't like
exactly what you're saying.
I do not like this reference at all, and this is why I dropped the references from a 10 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10.
Honestly, I'm not doing this just because, but I might also. No, I'm gonna leave mine at a 10 out of 10 because I didn't realize I was watching the movie, but it really does. That does sour it. That's a pretty nasty one. I don't even mind the orcs, but that does. Because it almost like you said, like that Theoden thing where he's quoting a historical speech is really cool, but it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, oh, you're gonna make everything a historical thing and nothing original from the movies. It's like that was just another cultural thing. I don't know. It makes it feel cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think the arise moment really works. The death moment, on the other hand, I do not think works at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like the duality of it is funny because, like you said, how close those are. Those are immediate back to back too, and it just works great and then doesn't.
So the next thing that didn't work for me, the final thing that didn't work for me, was that I was pretty meh about the whole being pledged to death bit on the Tower Bridge.
Uh-huh.
It didn't sit right with me. It's hard to express. It seemed overly dramatic, and she's not really enamored with death. She's an awesome character who's there to protect her people and take advantage of evil's manipulatability. And so the whole being pledged to death thing just didn't sit with me quite well. And so yeah.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. It flew right over. Like it wasn't good, but it wasn't bad for me. Very bleh.
Which is fair. It bothered me though. The screaming death and the being pledged to death bit, both death related, are the ones that did not sit well with me.
Yeah.
And those are my biggest complaints about the movie, which even in the grand scheme of those being my biggest complaints and me really not liking them, that is not going to stop me from enjoying this movie.
Right. Yeah, it was. I definitely enjoyed it.
Is there anything on this list that makes you want to subtract any points?
No, I'm leaving it.
Okay.
I'm leaving it. I mean, the death thing, almost, but no, even that, it's fine. It didn't bug me while I was watching the movie enough to offend me, so I'm going to leave it as 10, and then that's the only thing I was even close to changing on.
Okay, and I already worked in my negatives when I gave scores earlier.
Right.
So overall, on average, JD, your scores give this a 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10? I wouldn't have overall said that, but that's interesting.
By these metrics, with the scores you gave it, works out to a 9 out of 10.
I mean, it's nitpicky. I probably would have, if I was just somebody asked me how was it, I'd say 8 out of 10 just off the top of my head. But, now 9 out of 10 is my average. I'll go with that from now on.
Yep. If you wanted to round it, you could even say 9.1.
9.1.
Mine works out to a 9.4.
Yeah. So high praise then from both of us.
Yeah. So
I think I'm so low because of the animation too. But honestly, really, if the animation just were slightly better, I could totally see it being much better. Like, just that's the only thing I could even really complain about.
Mm-hmm. So what are your hopes for the future with this?
So hopes, I don't know if I actually hope for it but when I was done watching this movie, I was like, man, this would have been a great long miniseries. I referenced it a few times throughout this, like a little bit more development in getting to know the characters. This could have been a great like season finale. I want the story to continue too. I want to see more of what Hera's doing. I really like her character. Olwen's alive at the end, so her being a major character or the sidekick would be great too. I want a miniseries, definitely. Hope for it? I don't have much hope for it.
I would love to see more anime adaptations in general.
Yeah.
I'll take your miniseries. I'll take more movies. I'll take whatever. So
I do feel like if they did make a mini series, though, it would have to like be very far off and reference Lord of the Rings kind of very little, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because it does feel like Hera, as it mentioned, is a tale of her own.
Yeah. Well, I think that finishes up our direct discussion of the movie. We've done our rings. Let's do our things.
All right.
So for Wizard's Wisdom, what is your favorite quote from the movie?
Freylof had a great line. He said, "The king has spoken. You will always have my sword, uncle, whether you value it or not." I felt like it was great, not only for his character, but that's just like a great philosophy and worldview of doing the right thing regardless of, you know, what other people think of it.
That quote really drives home what a wonderful, honorable person he is, and emphasizes his quality as a leader.
Also, it foreshadows the ending a bit.
Indeed it does. My favorite from the entire movie was the narrator's line, Eowyn's line, "It is not easy to hold on to hope when an ill wind blows."
Yeah.
It just struck me as very Tolkien-esque.
Right, it does.
It fit into the style that I like to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging the theme of hope there was something I enjoyed. Did you have any others you wanted to talk about?
No, that's okay. That one was the one that struck me the most, and it kept coming up when we were talking about Freyalif. I really liked it. Like that really hammered home how good of a character he was. Why he was a good decision to make a king. He has integrity.
Mm-hmm.
But no, that was the only quote, and it stuck with me pretty well.
Okay.
Any more for you?
So it was a quote early on from Eowyn referring to Hera. She says, "Her mother did not live to see the dawn." Like I said earlier, all of Eowyn's lines are so quotable. They're so good. Mm-hmm. This was just one that really struck me. Since it was early on in the movie, it brought me into trusting that the writing, the dialogue was going to be really good. Yeah. And I got to say, largely, this line held that promise, and the movie delivered on that promise. Mm-hmm. Other lines like, "Did you think I would slink away like an old cur and lick my wounds?" really hit that chord as well. I feel like words like cur are really underused.
Yeah, the way that line was delivered was pretty, like, it was Wolf, and I think I complimented his voice actor a few times, but you really feel the, like, I don't know. Seething. Yeah, that's a good word for it. You hear pretty raw emotion in there, seething. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so those are specifically the quotes I wanted to talk about. Mm-hmm. Next, we have a new segment for you. Magical Melodies. This is our poetry segment.
Oh, okay.
So there hasn't really been enough poetry in the movie so far for us to do an entire segment on it, but I was so happy when the movie opened and there was Hama singing his "Where is the horse? Where is the rider?" This is a thing. So this is a type of poetry. This is a type of poetry called ubi sunt poetry. Ubi sunt is Latin for "where are they?" It's typically reflective poetry, characterized by that question style, "Where is the horse? Where is the rider?" And it focuses on impermanence and mortality. Mm-hmm. This type of poetry is a big type in, you guessed it, Old English, Anglo-Saxon, Norse type cultures. Mm-hmm. Tolkien actually uses the ubi sunt style of poetry in his poem Where Are the Horse and the Rider? It's a poem in The Lord of the Rings. I'm sure we'll do a segment on it when we get to it. Okay. But that's where Hama's poem is coming from, is from Tolkien's ubi sunt poem in The Lord of the Rings. A real-life example of ubi sunt poetry is a poem called The Wanderer. So an example of what that would sound like is, "Where is the horse? Where is the young warrior? Where is the giver of treasure? Where are the seats of the banquets? Where are the joys in the hall? Alas the bright cup, alas the mailed warrior, alas the glory of the prince, how the time has gone, vanished under night's helm as if it never were." And we'll be linking a translation of The Wanderer in the description in case anyone is interested in reading the entire poem. This particular verse is the Ubisunt portion of it. Overall, I think the movie does an awesome job of making Rohan feel very Anglo-Saxon. And it's little things like throwing in Ubisunt poetry that really does that to me.
Yeah, that was a lot deeper than when I saw you made note about how the movie did a great job making them feel Anglo-Saxon. I thought you were talking about like the locations, the architecture, the characters, the beliefs, which is all still a good way of doing it. But I didn't realize it was on a higher level like that too. I missed the connection between that and Anglo-Saxon poetry, which is just gives it another layer to connect to, and gives kind of like something you can point to and say this is a direct link between Anglo-Saxon and them. And yeah, the movie did a great job of that. Then picking that out, I feel like of all the things they could have from Tolkien's works, was this? You said this poem, his poem, "Where Are the Horse and the Rider," is that in Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
Okay, so they still took it from they still adapted Lord of the Rings, but like they didn't have to have that specific part in that spot, that really hammered it home. So it was a really good adaptational choice.
Absolutely. So good it got its own segment.
Well, this segment has a lot of miles under it, I feel.
Definitely.
As we get into the books, especially.
Yes. The segment will shine once we get to the books.
But yeah, it started here.
And that brings us to the end of the podcast. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
And a special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey. And thank you for listening.